Welcome back. We're talking about the increasing rate of suicide. Joining us with more is Brian Jacobs, a Marine Corps veteran and founder of Vets to Success, Terry Cassidy, the Executive Director for Bayside Center for Behavioral Health, and Dr. Eddie Renier, a clinical psychologist in Sarasota. Thank you all for coming out and joining us this evening. Now, when it comes to suicide, there's always more questions than there are answers as to why anybody would want to no longer feel like they want to live. But in a culture that seems to idolize celebrities and a totem pole of people that seem to put fortune and fame on the top of that, it seems that we talk about this a little bit more when there's celebrities involved. Terry, can you talk to me a little bit about this being an issue that does not discriminate at mental illness, suicide awareness? It doesn't discriminate regardless where you stand on that totem pole.
Right. It crosses all socioeconomic, race, religions, just across the board on all that. There is no discrimination. You know, one in 10 men suffer depression, and 1 in 5 women suffer depression, and depression is a leading contributor for suicide. One of the leading contributors. Okay.
And Dr. Renier, it was reported, you know, Kate Spade, her sister, said that Kate was obsessed with the suicide of Robin Williams, and the details of Robin Williams' suicide were unveiled. Do you think that those specific details from suicide should be released to the public because perhaps of maybe copycats who might idolize that idea of suicidal thoughts and the way that those actions were taken?
Sure. Whenever celebrities commit suicide, the risk of copycats increases. But let's be clear. Depression is the cause of suicide, and anyone who commits suicide is usually depressed or using a substance, alcohol or some drug. And a person who feels cut off from family, who's alone, and who's suffering a lonely pain. Depression is a dark cloud that comes across people and gives them no hope. And when you're in that moment, you just want to escape, and death is an escape.
Certainly. Well, another example would be perhaps not suicide related is when Carrie Fisher's family begged her, begged for the drugs in her system not to be released to the public. We see drug overdoses also an option when it comes to suicide. Do you think there's a similarity between the suicide and drug overdoses when it comes to privacy?
Yeah, I think that is. I think there's some things that should be held private, and that's private. We can talk about someone's suicide, we can mourn that person. We don't have to release sensitive information, medical history, that kind of thing. We should respect the living and the dead. The way to deal with depression and suicide is to treat it. People who get treatment don't commit suicide. It's people who don't get treatment, people who are cut off who do. And so we should be talking about how people get help rather than glamorizing their death.
Certainly. And for you, Brian, coming from a military standpoint, you've seen this, we know some of the statistics when it comes to military. Talk to me a little bit about what's happening with the troops when it comes to suicide.
Well, I've started to find out that it's a sense of identity. It's a sense of knowing who you once were and then getting out of the military and not knowing who that person is at all. And trying to reintegrate back to a world that you don't understand and you don't fit into. And then when you do try to reacclimate and you fail, you start to feel a piece of, why am I here? Where do I belong? And am I really feeling a purposeful life where I've come from nothing but serving purpose? And so, veterans are looking to serve again. And that's where I think the shortcomings are. They're not finding purposeful work.
All right. Well, we are just getting warmed up. Our conversation on increasing rates of suicide will continue after the break. Welcome back. We're talking about the rise of suicide, what you can do to look for warning signs, and where you can find help here on the Suncoast. Now, Terry, I wanted to ask you some of those signs of suicide. What can we look out for when it comes to that?
Sure. People researching, talking about wanting to commit suicide, isolating, withdrawing, changes in eating, changing in drinking, being more abusive with alcohol and drugs, giving away their belongings, putting their fears in order, just an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. And then another big factor is feeling, and this is a big one, feeling like they're a burden to other people or to society in general.
Okay, and we saw in Jess Dowderick's report employers saying, you know, when you have an employer, if you have cancer, like the lady who we spoke with said, you go to an oncologist and you tell your employer that that's what you need to do. But when you have a mental health issue, it's much harder to address that issue. Dr. Renier, what would you recommend to people when it comes to talking to their employer about a perhaps mental illness that they believe they have?
Mental illness, like any illness, is an illness.
Mm-hmm.
And so an employer has to listen to it. Just like cancer, just like any other disease, it's not treated any differently. I think the fear is the stigma associated with it, that somehow the person is going to think you really have schizophrenia. In society, we think that there's only one mental disorder, schizophrenia, psychosis, nothing else. It is as if to think that the only disease you could have is cancer. Well, it's simply not true. So you should be able to approach your employer, and if you can't, approach a family member, a friend. The best thing we can do if we're feeling sad is make a social connection. That's the best protection against taking your life, is if you have friends, generally you don't do it.
All right. And Brian, I wanted to talk to you about the social media aspect of this when it comes to kids, teenagers, maybe even people that are millennials taking their lives, seeing kind of this generalization of looking up to celebrities or people on social media who are taking their own lives. How do you think social media plays a role in all of this?
I mean, social media plays a fact in everybody's life. I mean, and I hate to say it this way, but a lot of people live in social media looking for identity. Mm-hmm. They look at other people's lives and go, oh, that's what I want to be, or that's what I want to do. And so, you know, me being a chef also, you know, Anthony Bourdain was someone I admired. I was I was wanted to be Anthony Bourdain. I just wanted to live his life, and it's one of these things when you look up to someone who's setting such a high bar in life, you don't really understand what's going inside. I often tell it like it's a beautiful tattoo. On the outside, you see this beautiful piece of work, but the inside is so dark and ominous, and you don't see that inside on social media. You see everybody's life from a different perspective, and then when you start to try to relate to that person, it's almost unrelatable because you haven't been in their shoes.
Certainly. And Terry, you've served on numerous behavioral health boards. What is being done perhaps from a government level, from a state level, federal level to address this issue? We talk a lot about fixing the issue, but what's being done?
Unfortunately not. You know, they've put a lot more resources into substance use and the opioid epidemic, but mental health has really suffered with funding restrictions. And you probably can look and see many outpatient clinics that are community-based have actually decreased in size and services. So people that have commercial insurance are much better off, but people on Medicaid have a lot more challenges, and that's an area that really needs to be addressed. So we're looking at ways that, I know at Sarasota Memorial, how we can bridge all this and really best serve the community. And that's what I'm going to be tasked with for the next several months, is really working with our community partners and our people that utilize our services and the staff to figure out what we need to do to help better serve the community here.
Okay, and Dr. Renier, how have things changed in regard to suicide awareness in the past 30 years? How have things changed from what you've seen?
I wish I could tell you that things were better. They're not. In fact, things have gone backwards. We have spent the last 30 years decimating our mental health system in this country. And in Florida, it's a ragtag, poorly organized system. We need to fund it more. We need to do public education spots. We need to talk to people honestly about mental disorder so that everybody doesn't think the only mental disorder you have is to be psychotic. In fact, there's over 300 types of mental disorders you can have, but they all have something in common. They all have depression in common. And then depression leads to suicide. So we need to educate people about it and how to take care of themselves, how to avoid depression, how to avoid being isolated. And we virtually have no public education on mental disorder. And the services we have decreased so much, as we just heard, that in fact they are almost non-existent. People have a hard time finding resources.
Well, Brian, I know June is PTSD Awareness Month. Can you talk about how PTSD can lead to suicide and a little bit about your own personal experience for us?
Yeah, I mean, PTSD, it's just a traumatic event in your life that And being a veteran, we associate PTSD with losing a friend in combat or losing a buddy overseas, but PTSD can come from talking to your brother 1 minute and then next minute he's taking his life, which is something that happened personally to me. A lot of the issues we have as veterans is we don't trust in the system that's failing. We don't trust in the opportunities to reach out and stay fulfilled in those organizations. As a small community advisor, we have Operation Rubik's through SRQ Vets, which is providing platforms where veterans can go out and find battle buddies to put themselves back into a group of people they trust and they can go forward with and know that they're going to be okay. And I think that's a real solution from a veteran standpoint, is that we have to trust the leadership that's in place, that they're there for our best interests and want to see us better. And that's something, as a veteran, that's what kind of saved my life, was finding a place where there was somebody who I could look up to that wanted to see my life continue. And that's where you find that leadership, that mentorship, and those small-based organizations like SRQ Vets and Operation Rubik's to make that impact.
Okay, and now we are a little short on time, so I wanted to get some final thoughts from all three of you. How do we as a country move forward and do better with helping those who are suffering with suicidal thoughts? Dr. Renier?
Well, this is something I think about all the time, and I belong to a council in Tallahassee that sort of advised the government, our government, about what to do on a number of topics, and one of them is mental health. In fact, I'm organizing a statewide research project to look at what do we need to do. But in my opinion, we need to fund our already resources more than we have so far. We have to provide hospitals with, and stop making mental health a stepchild, move it up to central place. We need public education. We need the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Substance Abuse to work together collaboratively, because frequently it is mental disorder that leads to substance abuse, and sometimes not the reverse. Something that we overlook. The other thing is to really begin to talk to kids about how to be healthy. Exercise, eat properly, don't drink too much. Those are simple things that keep a mind healthy. Stay out of trouble, keep focused. Those are things that help. Have friends, spend less time on social media, more time making connections, social connections. Okay. If we do these, we do better.
Okay, and for you, Terry?
Jacqueline, thank you tonight for having us on and talking about this difficult subject. It's, this is a great step, is education, community education. And I would say really promoting, as we had talked about, healthcare parity, so that you treat a mental illness the same as you would a physical ailment. And we really need to stop balancing that. And I would also say that our therapies are highly effective. Suicide is the most preventable death if individuals can get connected to treatment. So we have very effective treatments.
All right, and for you, Brian?
I would just say, it's, in the military, it's so looked harshly upon to say you have combat fatigue or you have PTSD, and to advise the veterans and the loved ones in the community that it's no longer that status quo. You can reach out, you can find the support you need, and find a battle buddy, find somebody who you trust, and then say, I have an issue. And be okay and seek the best help. I practice mindfulness on a daily basis, watching motivational videos, having set goals, having an organized mindset, start scheduling my life in a progressive manner. And that's where a lot of the shortcomings come, is people are not seeing their lives in the future. They're looking at the here and now, and it's not where they want it to be.
Well, thank you all so much. Now, before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show on the congressional race taking place in the 16th District. Republican Vern Buchanan is the front-runner and favored to win again, but will the recent blue wave hitting the Suncoast hurt him come this November? Buchanan will face the winner of the Democratic primary between Dave Shapiro and Jan Schneider. We went to Facebook to hear what you want to see, who you want to see representing the district. Diane says, at this point, I don't really care who is running. I'm so disgusted with the GOP, I'm now a registered NPA and wouldn't vote Republican if they were the only ones running. Jason says Vern will win, but David Shapiro will give him a run for his money. Jan Schneider's political expiration date was about 14 years ago, so not her. And Elizabeth keeps it short and sweet to the point, saying Shapiro, Jacqueline says Jan, at least she stands for something. And finally, Lily, reminding citizens to register and vote. Now, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, head over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And thank you to Brian Jacobs, a Marine Corps veteran and founder of Vets to Success, Terry Cassidy, the Executive Director for Bayside Center for Behavioral Health, and Dr. Eddie Renier, a clinical psychologist in Sarasota, for joining us tonight.